Yeah, thanks for having us. Much appreciated. Um, I think the conversations before were pretty good, and they've kind of looped into what I had down here in my notes, which is great, and also some of the questions too. So excited to chat with our guest here, Imteaz. I think he has a wealth of experience and a really interesting background. So I'll let him introduce himself, and then I can tell you a little bit about who I am, and then we'll get into it. If that works.
Hi everyone, Imteaz from Reckitt. I've worked at Reckitt for 16 years across the Australian, UK, Western Europe, and for the last 4 years the American markets. So most of my career has been on the healthcare side of the equation, but for the last 4 years I've worked in baby formula. I started my career in the sales side of the organization, and then 6 years into my career this thing called e-commerce pops up. I was qualified because I was good at PowerPoint and Excel at the time, and that was all you needed to get into e-com at the time. I then launched our first marketplace and direct-to-consumer presence back in Australia. That got noticed, shipped to the UK to start launching more direct-to-consumer sites across Western Europe and the US. The company decides to buy B. Johnson, which was the baby formula business that had a sizable D2C business to start with. So I moved over to the US at the height of the pandemic, where our orders on a DTC site go up 20x overnight. We have no inventory and nothing to do, like just years of backlog to fill, which was very interesting. And then 2 years later, our key competitor, Abbott, they go out of stock because they have a recall, which was another nightmare to deal with. And around that time, I shifted over to performance media, which means running all the retail media for the baby formula division of Reckitt. So across content, in-house media buying, as well as in-house data analytics. That's what I look after now.
Yeah, and I just got loud, sorry about that. I wrote some things down too because I knew he probably wouldn't get into it, but I think it's really interesting. He's also an advisory board member of Harvard Business Review. He's an angel investor. He's a podcast host. He's got a podcast called Applied Intelligence. He's got a pretty cool website that I pulled up, and I want to read you a paragraph off of it pretty quickly. It says, I am a citizen of the world. I was born in Bangladesh, given an Arabic name, grew up in Australia, married a Lebanese girl. I've worked in the Netherlands and the UK, and now reside in the US. Which I think is really interesting because it gives obviously a great worldview of what's going on. But I love this type of stuff because, I grew up in a suburb in New York, and now I live in New Jersey, and I, didn't really have a worldview until I left the United States, and now we can sit on stage together and chat. And it's not every day that gets to happen. But also being on stage with, a marketing leader that I can pepper with questions, that's not every day as well. So this is cool. So I'm excited for this. And also, sorry, my name is Leahy. They mentioned me, but I'm the head of sales over at PCH Media, which is Publishers Clearinghouse. I spent the last about 8 years at a company called Lotamy, helping them build their third-party data exchange, and I came over to PCH to help with helping other marketers build their first-party data asset up. Really, we have a couple interesting products where we can, help you. Build up your own audiences, and I think that is super interesting, just the way that the marketplace is evolving right now, and especially for CPG brands and any brand that is a bit backed up from the point of sale, and I know how hard it is to get those users. I just find that to be really interesting, so I was excited to come here. So that's a little bit about my background. So we'll get into it.
Tell them how we met.
Yeah, we met. This is funny. I was at we both were at an IAB show last year in San Francisco. We chatted very briefly. He was talking to his Amazon rep, who I was also talking to, and so we had probably 5 minutes hello, and he said he lived in Whippany, New Jersey, and I live in Morristown, New Jersey. It's right next to each other, so we found that interesting. And then we never really spoke after that. We kind of lost touch, and then all of a sudden they put us on the same panel here, and now here we are speaking again. So it is kind of funny how life works out, right? Full circle on that one, which is great. So I am going to start with just a few icebreakers here that have nothing to do with anything that we're supposed to talk about. I just found it, we're in Vegas. I wanted to hear about, a little bit about what you would do in Vegas if you weren't sitting here right now. What your favorite casino game is, if you have one, and then also unrelated to anything about that, what your favorite Reckitt product is.
Okay, favorite casino game is Texas Hold'em poker. Poker's a lot of fun. What I would do if I wasn't here is be eating at one of the restaurants that's on my list. I'm a big foodie, so I'm trying to get through the top 10. Favorite Reckitt product? One of my favorite Reckitt products would be the fact that we actually customize formula for babies that are in the NICU. So if it's down to one specific variant that needs to be made, we actually do that in our research facility in Evansville, which is quite cool.
Yeah, no, that's great. Both my kids were on FML, both were in the NICU, so I understand that. Yeah, that's great. I think mine, though, is probably Finnish, just because in New Jersey, where we are, we have very hard water, and I find that the hard soap works much better than the liquid soap in terms of getting those hard water stains out of your dishes, which is something that I never thought I'd care about when I was 25 and I'm 40, and I'm talking about that on stage. But yeah, blackjack is probably my favorite casino game, and if I wasn't here, I'd like to be in a sports book, some sort of baseball game or a football game. So, all right, let's get into the important stuff. So, we had a pretty good conversation on the phone, real quick. A pretty good conversation. You mentioned a few things that I think it'd be really worthwhile to talk about. But I think to start, I just want to hear, with all the changes going on in the marketplace right now, how Reckitt is evolving in their approach to connect with their consumers.
So the framework that we like to use is called people, process, and platform. And you can use this for basically any type of transformation that a company goes through. So people, do we have the right people for the opportunity at hand or the changes that are happening right in the marketplace right now? Process, are we actually set up to win when we're going to change everything in terms of how everything actually works? And then platforms, do we have the right technology partners and the right tools that we can actually use? I've been in so many situations where an organization has bought the Ferrari F1 team of a technology platform, but we don't have a Lewis Hamilton and we don't have a Toto Wolff, not that they're great anymore, but to actually service that technology, and it's fallen to pieces and we've wasted tons of money. So for me, it's really understanding through that framework, each opportunity that comes up, whether it's e-commerce, direct-to-consumer, GenAI, blockchain, metaverse, how do you really adapt to that opportunity for your brand and look at it through this framework to see if it's really going to do anything for you and how much should you really invest in taking a bet on those things.
Which one do you think is hardest to achieve out of those three, people, process, or platforms? Which one is the hardest to get up and running?
It depends. But from my experience, if you have the right team in place, so if you have the right people, you can adapt to any type of situation. So I've been in situations where we weren't hitting numbers, the stretch targets were simply too high, but I enjoyed working with the team that I was working with. And then I've been in times where I've been overachieving the numbers and not working in a great team. So in terms of prioritizing people, process, and platforms, you always really need to have a good team around you, not just to tackle the opportunities of what it is today, but really to focus on the long term and set yourself up for success.
Yeah, I agree on that one. I think that there's a lot of talk about AI and everything that's happening, in that space, but there's still the human touch that has to go into it. And I think about using ChatGPT in my sales outreach or having my sellers do that, and there's always you're taking something off of that and then refocusing that to get to the end user, right? And I think that works quite a bit in different realms of our industry. So I think people is definitely the most important one. I tend to agree. How can you relate that over to retail media? I know retail media is a big thing for you guys. Obviously, everybody's talking about it. I mean, I think right now there's we were just talking about it. There's over 400 retail media providers out there right now. So how do you pick, and how does that work when you think about your people, process, and platforms?
Sure thing. So yeah, there's just too many out there for us to physically manage. Similar to the answer that Michelle gave from Newell, you kind of picked the top 5 for us, and similar sort of situation. Our big 5 are very big, and then the rest of the retailers are relatively small. So we're focusing on our top 5. Secondly, it's really understanding what data comes out of those platforms and how consistent is that across the retailers from a performance point of view. So, for example, we don't get page view data from our omni retailers today. So even though I do retail media ads, I don't actually know how many people actually viewed my pages organically versus through paid. So if I don't have that as a basic metric, then what am I actually paying for? Whereas when I grew up and when I spent 4 or 5 years in direct to consumer, I had all this quality data, and that's what I'm really looking for now in this retail media world.
Right.
And not a lot of people giving me that.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I'm a data guy. I think that data is key, so I agree with that for sure. Okay. Yeah. Let's pivot a little bit from there. I want to talk about also AI as we're focused on a little bit here. There's a stat that was out of eMarketer that said I think it was like 90 to 95% of decision makers at US agencies said that they expect their media campaigns and their media strategy to evolve and change continually with AI, and AI to make a much more beneficial impact on those media strategies going forward, which I'm surprised is not 100%. I don't know who those 5 to 10% are that don't think AI is going to be something, but how are you using AI in your business right now? How do you see your business evolving with AI?
Sure thing. So across 2 vectors, the first is in-house media buying, and then secondly is content generation. On the in-house media buying side, one of the pieces of work we've done is partnered with Amazon on Amazon Marketing Cloud and really mined Marketing Cloud for all of the audience insights that we can garner from that. But before we did that, we had this hunch that if we paired all of our first-party data that we have on our CDP, and we've been collecting first-party data on parents for over 20 years now. CRM has been the heart of growing Imteaz brand. The going-in assumption was if we paired these 2 data sets together, so our CDP to Amazon, we would be able to execute media campaigns that are consistent to what we do from a CRM point of view. Mainly because in our CDP, one of the mandatory requirements of entering our CDP is giving us the date of birth of the baby and modeling how far away are you as a mum from giving birth, and then how deep are you into the feeding journey. So we thought if we match the 2 data sets together and replicated the media activations that we're doing through SMS and CRM, would that improve our results? Because from a reach point of view, we felt that we were reaching way too big of an audience when it came to DSP to start with. What we then found is that actually mining Amazon, or actually mining the retailer's data for insights is way more valuable than our own data. What I mean by that is, for example, if you're Huggies and you go into a data clean room like Amazon Marketing Cloud, and the retailer has enabled you to mine the data clean room for a search signal. So if you're Huggies, you type in Pampers, last 30 days, give me everybody who has searched that keyword and not purchased diapers as a category. It will spit out a list to you of, for example, 300,000 people. That 300,000 people is the most incremental audience that an e-commerce marketer could ever dream for. So now we actually have access to that data. So what do you actually do with that? So what we've been able to do is build our own DSP buying machine, essentially, that will track the 300,000 people into 2,000 identity chunks. So we get 150 audiences, and then we activate retail media against that. We rank and prioritize which audiences are actually most beneficial to us, and then we scale spend from there. So for a human media buyer to do that level of granular detail is physically impossible. For them to manage, we're talking tens of thousands of audiences alone, let alone then doing the permutations and combinations of creative selection on top. It's just physically impossible to do. So AI is essentially doing all of that laborious testing, but also optimizing for lowering our impressions to the audience that is most relevant for my brand, which is baby formula, but also increasing frequency to the people that are actually in market for baby formula. When you're in baby formula, you don't want to stay in the category for a very long time. You want to, get off it as fast as possible.
It's not cheap.
It's not cheap.
Yeah. Which is great for you guys.
Yeah. But we only have you as a customer for a very short time.
Right.
So after you've gone through the 6 or 9 months, it's very important for us to stop advertising to you because you don't care about the category anymore. We could move on to something else, Finish, for example, or another one of our brands. But from a baby formula point of view, you're no longer relevant to us. So that's part one. Part two is creative generation. And one of the things I'm actually talking about in a grocery shop tomorrow is how we're leveraging generative AI to really scale up the work that we're doing from a content generation point of view. So the first thing is we have tens of thousands of creative assets. No one's tagged all of those assets properly. No one does the work of manually going in and tagging all of these things. So we went in and tagged assets with things like what's the marketing claim inside of the image, what's the color scheme of the DSP, what's the call to action, what's the product SKU, what's the size and spec used, where was it placed, etc. Because all of those things are mapped to a creative ID, which is mapped to a campaign ID, we now have impressions, clicks, and sales against marketing claim. So effectively, we've got effectiveness measures for our marketing claims tied against our retail media or e-commerce performance.
Yeah.
That's fed a generative AI model that is now helping us create DSP creatives from scratch using the insights that we have.
It's interesting. It's really interesting stuff. Is there any data missing in the CDP clean room realm that you just can't get that you wish you guys had? Is there something out there that you're like, there's just no good way to get this and it would help us out tremendously?
I think some retailers are doing a better job than others. The key thing for me is not just looking at data clean rooms from a historical look back point of view and doing measurement. It's more how do I actually activate this stuff.
Yeah.
So when your clean room is easily connectable to a DSP or a media buying side, that's when you can make sense of it. So in terms of missing data, the more data, the more better.
Right.
But it's really what am I going to do with that? So it ultimately comes down to what is the data that you have available? What can you actually solve with that data for your particular product, brand, or category? And then how do you activate that as fast as possible and automate the process because you don't want humans to manage that for you.
I find that baby formula is one of those things that is probably more challenging than the other products that you guys have under your umbrella. Specifically because, when you think about going to a store and taking something off the shelf, it's different than what you feed to your newborn, right? And so how does that challenge affect your marketing in terms of like, okay, well, if someone's child is in the NICU, then they're going to get whatever formula is in that NICU, and is it up to the NICU to decide what they're giving, or is it one nurse in the NICU that's like, oh, I know Enfamil, I'm going to give it to them, because they might have both supplies there, right? And then from there, you might be hooked on that because that's the first thing that was given to the child, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So baby formula is a very complicated category versus the rest of CPG. I personally think of it less CPG, more pharma, pharmaceutical than CPG. But for me, the way I think about it from a retail media point of view is there are different digital penetrations per category, which lead to different strategies. So dishwashing tablets and dishwashers as a category, that's over 25% online. Baby formula, similar sort of case.
Yeah.
Headache tablets, not that online, digitally. Quick commerce is doing quite well when it comes to healthcare, but not necessarily Amazon or not necessarily Walmart.com. So per strategy, per category and per brand, you kind of need to understand where am I in the rank within customer path to purchase. What are they actually doing when they come to that digital path to purchase? Is there a data point that I can optimize against? Or do I even have to inform them that this is
an available channel that they can actually purchase on.
Yeah. One of the things that really works for baby formula, unsurprisingly, is subscribe and save. Right? A lot of retailers in the US don't have subscribe and save, whereas it makes up a huge chunk of direct-to-consumer as well as pure-play businesses.
Right.
So enabling these, e-commerce tactics with our retail partners for those categories where you need it is quite important.
Who does have it? I think is Amazon one of the only ones that has it.
Amazon has it. Walmart kind of has it, but hasn't really talked about it too much. But that's the two major retailers I'm aware of.
Speaking about data, I mean, there's been a lot of chatter, obviously, over the last 5 years. I can't believe we're still talking about it before the deprecation of the third-party cookie. And obviously, Google said they're not going to do it. We all kind of are figuring that it's still going to happen because they're going to put that change into the consumer's hands of, opting out, which we feel probably pretty strongly that everybody's going to opt out of that. How does that pose a challenge to you? Does it pose a challenge? Has that affected the way that you're going to, look at data? What are your thoughts on that?
So, from a baby formula point of view, we've had our foundation in CRM for over 20 years.
Yeah.
So, it's not going to be that much of a big impact from a baby formula business point of view. But more broadly, from a total CPG industry point of view, I think this is where retail media kind of has an opportunity to shine. But in order to shine, it needs to be more open about the data. I told you no page view data on omni-retailers in the US. That's part one. Part two is then let me segment that data the way I want to segment that data through a data clean room, right? Rather than having a managed service relationship where the data scientists sit on the side of the retail media network and do all of that crunching for me. I'd like to do that. I'd like to keep some of that IP on my side and find those audiences and insights for myself and not tell everyone about it. So I think the key is when it comes to cookie deprecation, the audience insights that retail media networks have and the fact that they now have higher funnel media activations available to them as well. It's a very exciting opportunity.
Yeah. Let's see how much time we have. A couple minutes here. Any future predictions you're thinking of right now? Anything? I'll leave the door open.
Yeah, I think the way to think about AI and the examples that I talked to you about is very bottom-up thinking, which is, you have workflows in a business that are kind of taking the human process out and replacing with automation, replacing with what machines can do better. Where I think AI gets even more interesting is when you train it to do top-down thinking. So, a company has a strategy. A strategy is then broken down into the functions. Those functions then get tasks. Those tasks get broken down into workflows. So my approach currently is looking at that bottom up because I see immediate value in doing that. But eventually we're going to get to an AI that is so smart that you can literally type in a company's name and it will spit out a McKinsey level business strategy for it, break that down into functions, what each function should do, how that should be activated, and the job flows and the workflows that is associated with that.
Yeah.
So I think the future is more about how do we adapt to these models becoming way more intelligent than what they are right now. Like we're comparing them to interns right now, but maybe 1,000 or 1 million interns all at the same time. But I think about it the other way, which is this could be replacing massive amounts of work for the entire industry.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's a bit like interns right now. I think that it's just going to continue to evolve and get much smarter. I actually think that it's going to turn from being interns into, I almost think about it like witnesses, right? Like, I think in the next, in the next 10 to 15 years, I guarantee that AI will be on a witness stand somewhere talking about what it overheard over some sort of crime, right? And it'll, I think it will get that smart, right? And it's like, how do we, obviously as humans, take advantage of that for our benefit, but also for our businesses, right? Like I think there's a lot of great things that are going to come of it, but right now it certainly is a bit of, a really high-end bike, but with some training wheels on it that, when you think back to people, process, and platforms, that people really, are still very much important in that mix when they're working with it. Anything you want to leave the audience with today? Any takeaways that you want to?
Be super curious,
Yeah.
right? Like all of this stuff is so accessible to learn. I never learned digital media formally. I just learned it by going on YouTube and picking all of this stuff up. All of this stuff is very accessible. It's not very hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a blessing when you have a company that supports you to make these decisions to take on these challenges.
A company he almost didn't work for. Tell him that story.
Okay. So, funny story. I was doing a graduate interview at Reckitt, and I was running late. I hate being late. I usually turn up early. And then I missed the turn onto the street, so I decided I'm going to go home. I'm not going to do the graduate interview. There's another 10 people at the interview. They're not going to miss me. The HR lady calls me. She's like, "Where are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, I missed the turn. I'm, 5 minutes away." So I turn around. When you see the McDonald's, take a left. If she didn't call me that day, I wouldn't work for Reckitt.
Oh, wow.
So
Interesting. 16 years later, here
16
you are.
years later, that's where I am.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's all I have. Yeah, we appreciate it, and yeah,
I think we have one question in the audience right here.
I want to get a sense of your channel selection. You talked about how your team is in the weeds doing all the data, and you're working with the various retail media network partners, probably we guess who the top 5 are. How are you going through and determining what your channels are from high awareness, mid funnel, low funnel? How are you going through that process?
So it comes back to what are the objectives that we're trying to achieve for each particular brand, but then what can we achieve through the retail media network that we can't achieve through buying that channel directly. So for example, we've done work with TikTok and Walmart together and used Walmart's audiences to buy on TikTok, and we've seen relatively good results from that. But now there's ways of using our own data, pushing it through a data clean room into TikTok directly and being omni-channel from an activation point of view. So there are lots of ways to skin this cat. It just depends on what are you actually trying to achieve.
More programming.